Well, good morning and good evening, everyone.
Welcome back.
Welcome to another evening and morning to Suta and the City. And we're coming to you live from New York City, talking about the great topic of resentment or to feel again and again and again. So I hope not too many of you are feeling resentment this evening, but if you are, well, we've got a few answers for you that'll hopefully help out in that situation. First,
The poem.
the poem.
Yes, a poet that probably no one here has heard of, but one of my new faves, Jan Zwicky, who is a professional philosopher from Canada, who has also published a few slender volumes of poetry, and I am enamored of it. By the way, is that the opposite of resentment? Enamored?
Enamored. In love with.
Yeah,
Yes, I would say it is the opposite.
I can't get enough.
That is. I am going to share my screen so that we can. And I like this, Stephen. You picked someone who's not American.
Not American and not male.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so at least I could do.
It is. And well done. Well
Thank
done.
you.
Absolutely. So, Jan Zawicki.
Jan Zwicky, Canadian philosopher who's written a lot about the great Austrian philosopher Wittgenstein, but she has also written these beautiful poems in a book called The Long Walk. And I thought we would read this poem for you, which is perhaps philosophical, and it's definitely interesting. A room, a space, so large perhaps it had no ceiling, and past the threshold, through the open door, a landscape falling into twilight, pink and mauve, a haze of frost. I was behind you, had been searching, urgent. You were on your way to meet me, stepping through that doorway, hair silver in the silver light. I called, you turned, and in your eyes I saw you would refuse. But then, a second later, knew instead that it was I who had said no. The grief stood in me like a knife, and in that instance, like a fairy tale, the floor, your hand, shoes, clothes, the light, the door frame, shed their surfaces. I saw things as they are, but still I could not see myself.
I saw things as they are.
I saw things as they are. I kind of like that because it's somewhat of a common Buddhist sutta refrain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I saw things as they are, but
Seeing
still I could
things.
not see myself.
It's interesting because since we're dealing with the topic of anger, and tonight specifically, resentment, when one is in the throes of anger, there is sort of this blindness to the self. It's everything is just focused on the object of our anger.
But I'm not so sure that's the same as seeing things as they are.
No, but
I
I
don't
just
know.
thought that was an interesting point.
It is an interesting
It is
point.
an
I mean, it
interesting.
seems like it's quite the opposite that in the case of being angry, you see almost nothing besides oneself. It seems to me. What do you think?
Well, I think you just said the opposite of what I just said.
So you're not agreeing. Are you angry?
I don't know. Maybe just the tiniest bit.
Is that a type of irritation?
Yeah.
Were you
Yeah.
irritated how I pronounced the word mauve? Because maybe it's mauve?
Ah, you say mauve, I say mauve.
I know
So
you're irritated. the way to get you like a knife. I say the wrong pronunciation.
We can just call the whole thing off.
Mauve, mauve. I've never understood how to pronounce that word.
Um, okay. Sorry for the siren in the background.
Is it irritating?
No, but it's just emblematic of New York
Be
City.
honest.
Not at all.
Okay. So we have a prequel to our reading.
Oh, that's right. And you were going to share that with us, right?
Yeah, is it okay if I use the word prequel?
Yes, you can use prequel.
I was going to use
I know you want.
prelude because it's sort of more musical, but I thought prequel was more cinematic.
It is cinematic.
Okay, I'll share my screen. So this is the immediately preceding sutta. Getting rid of resentment the first. And it's shorter, and it's 5 because this is still from the Book of Fives. Regina, are you going to read it for us?
Sure. Mendicants. A mendicant should use these 5 methods to completely get rid of resentment when it has arisen toward anyone. What 5? You should develop love for a person you resent. That's how to get rid of resentment for that person. You should develop compassion for a person you resent. You should develop equanimity for a person you resent. You should disregard a person you resent, paying no attention to them. You should apply the concept that we are the owners of our deeds to that person. This venerable is the owner of their deeds and heir to their deeds. Deeds are their womb, their relative, and their refuge. They shall be the heir of whatever deeds they do, whether good or bad. That's how to get rid of resentment for that person. A mendicant should use these 5 methods to completely get rid of resentment when it has arisen toward anyone. And
There you go.
I want to suggest that the brevity of that sutta, that prequel, if you will, does not encompass the brevity of this process by any means.
So you're saying it's like not working yet?
It takes a while for some. It takes a while for some. Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying.
So it's not just like easy as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, not
No.
at all. I do think it's a great method. So Stephen and we were talking about the, well,
Order.
why don't you talk about the order, Stephen?
Well, the order is interesting, and we sort of, I don't know if we agreed or disagreed or got irritated at each other about our thoughts, each other's thoughts. But it seems to me, in my humble opinion, that what's the order that is given is sort of in from best to as well as whatever you might be able to do. In other words, the first thing would be optimal, and the final thing would be, the fifth thing would be the last resort. That seems to me how it's presented. And so, of course, we, as you just read, the first choice would be to have metta, which he translates here as love. And then karuna, compassion, upekkha, equanimity. Then, if you can't evoke these wonderful mental states, just try to ignore them. Pay no mind. But even if that doesn't work, if you can't put this person out of your mind and you can't love them, which doesn't seem so inconceivable, then you should have this more intellectual thought process. This, that we are the owners of our actions, the heirs of our actions are the origin, the relative, and the refuge, etc., etc. And whatever they do, there's karmic results. So this somewhat intellectual thought process, I think, should be somewhat reassuring, but I think one can go off the rails with this too, by the way, by saying, well, they're going to get what's coming to them, and then we can sort of delight in their foreseeable misery, which I think would be a misreading. So that's my take. But Regina, you maybe have a different view.
Well, I think I have a different experience, which is it's really, really hard for me to go from straight up resentment to like all out love. It just like doesn't work that way for me. And one thing that I was told by some of my teachers is that if we have a really hard time with a certain person, that it may not always be possible to go to straight up love. Like maybe just one thing that I do, and I'll use my board, my condo board, as a stand in for a person because they seem to work very well. Because I always seem to have, I very rarely have positive feelings for my condo board. Let's just put it that way. Um, and so, what has worked for me in my experience is to, when they come to my mind and I have these resentments, oh, they're going to raise the fees again, they don't know how to run a building. Um, what happens is, if I just dismiss that, okay, I'm going to, what was it that they said?
Disregard, pay no
Yes.
attention.
So if I don't nurture that thought of the bad, mean, bad, awful condo board, and I just don't, I'm like, okay, not right now. We're not going to go there. That's very helpful because then that kind of brings about, um, after some time and some practice, equanimity. And then I'm able to go on to the higher aspirations. Or I haven't reached loving kindness yet, but definitely compassion. And sometimes a pleasant feelings, you know. Um, and
Now,
I,
it, sorry.
well, I just think a person, I understand why the Buddha is saying that, we should definitely aim for the highest possible aspiration, which is loving kindness. But I just don't want people to say, well, I can't go from hatred and anger to love, so forget it. And so I think for me, the nice end would be, where can you begin to get a softening of the heart and the mind? If that is just forgetting about them for a moment, I would say start there.
It's probably not, look, they're going to go to hell, and so whatever, I don't care. That's probably not the way to go, right?
Right. Definitely not. But I
Now,
mean,
what do you think about this order, though? That, you know, is it harder or easier to be equanimous or with a mind of compassion?
I mean, um, it really depends upon the individual, I guess. Some people are more drawn toward compassion. To me, equanimity means that I'm not shaking inside. I'm not like tense or angry, or it's it's a sense of neither extreme highs or lows. And
Hmm.
then that state of being gives gives room to nurture other higher states of mind,
Hmm.
the way I see it. But I do understand the Buddha's formulation going from the highest to like, okay, if you can't do that, do this.
It's interesting because in the classic presentation of the four sort of exalted states, not to say that I'm sure that the order is meaningful, but in that classic order, metta is the first and equanimity is the fourth. And so one might sort of think that we're working our way up some sort of ladder of exalted mental states. But here we have metta at the top of the top rung. But maybe this is because we're being presented with an irritating situation. I mean, it's always said that if you're angry, trying to have a mind of metta is not even a good choice because you're sort of like not in the right place. What do you think?
I think that it's very easy to think that we're practicing metta when, for me, if I go straight from anger to metta, what I'm really doing is suppressing how I'm really feeling, because that's bad. It's not bad. It's not good for us to have resentment or anger,
Yeah,
and it's not authentic for me. It's just not authentic.
it's true. I have to say, though, just this is not a rebuttal, but it just is an interesting side note that Venerable Bodhi, Bhikkhu Bodhi, often when he teaches metta, talks about false metta, which is that if you're trying to practice metta actively, like on the cushion, and you sort of just can't get it going, you can sort of pretend. Go through the motions. And the point being that even that going through the motions is a wholesome activity which may and hopefully lead to true metta. Because I think for some people, like perhaps myself even, at least at sometimes, it's actually very difficult to try to have a mind of loving kindness. But we could fake it. And so, fake it until you make it. Maybe is could be a valuable uh, practice, but probably not when you're on the subway and somebody has just spilled their morning coffee on your book. At that point, metta might not be option number one.
Right. And I'm not sure if it was Venerable Bodhi or who I heard it from, or maybe it's just something that people say, but that false metta is better than true hatred.
Right, because the wish, the aspiration is wholesome in itself, even if it's not the real deal.
Right.
Anyway,
Right. And I would argue that if we are in a state of resentment and not attempting any of those things that we saw in that prequel sutta that you just showed us, then we're going to perhaps be stuck in this place of resentment, which is a very, very unpleasant place to be, very
definitely.
painful. So some type of action must be made in order to avoid that. And I think I've mentioned that resentment is a dangerous one. It's feeling the same negative feelings over and over and over again, and it really can sicken us physically. So in the mind, in the body, it's a dangerous emotion because it's not healthy.
Wow. Should we go to our main course,
Let's go to the main course, and
sometimes called our entree?
I like that.
Although entree really means appetizer, I have to say.
Oh, come on. I didn't know
Yes,
that.
and definitely in French,
Oh, that makes sense.
because
Entree.
it's sort of the entry point of the food.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. So what do they call an appetizer in France?
I think they might call it an entree.
Oh
I'm
my
not
God,
sure.
that's wild. Okay.
Good
Okay.
question.
All right. That's an amazing thing. We're going to share this. And if any of you have the answer to that, once we get to the discussion part, we'd love to hear it. So I'll share my screen.
And if you'd like to read, please raise your hand. We
Oh,
love to have
yes.
readers.
Yes. Preferably if you have not, had the opportunity to read in the last couple classes, we always love to hear people read. We'd like to give people the chance. And if you don't want to, that's cool. If there's no takers, then what you will. And just as a reminder, if you're on the phone, it's *9 to raise your hand. And if you are on the computer, what do we say? It's in this reaction box.
Reactions.
So
Be
strange.
reactive.
It's such a strange thing that they
Yeah.
changed that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Getting rid of resentment, part 2.
And we're going to hear from Sariputta. Thank you so much, Todd, for volunteering. Todd.
Let me, sorry.
And after Todd, we have Ayavimala and then Catherine. Yay. How does it work?
I think it's all set.
Okay,
Oh, good.
I was getting a weird message, cannot unmute. Okay, getting rid of a resentment. There, Venerable Sariputta addressed the mendicants. Reverends, mendicants. Reverend, they replied. Sariputta said this. Reverends, a mendicant should use these 5 methods to completely get rid of resentment when it has arisen toward what 5? In the case of a person whose behavior by way of body is impure, but whose behavior by way of speech is pure, you should get rid of resentment for that kind of person. In the case of a person whose behavior by way of speech is impure, but whose behavior by way of body is pure, etc. In the case of a person whose behavior by way of body and speech is impure, but who gets an openness and clarity from time to time, etc. In the case of a person whose behavior by way of body and speech is impure, and who does an openness and clarity of heart from time to time, etc. In the case of a person whose behavior by way of body and speech is pure, and who gets an openness and clarity of heart from time to time, you should get rid of the resentment for that kind of person.
Thank you so much, Todd. And we have Ayavimala.
How should you get rid of resentment for a person whose behavior by way of body is impure, but whose behavior by way of speech is pure? Oh, body is impure, speech is pure. Suppose a mendicant wearing rag robes sees a rag by the side of the road. They'd hold it down with the left foot, spread it out with the right foot, tear out what was intact, and take it away with them. In the same way, at that time, you should ignore that person's impure behavior by way of body and focus on their pure behavior by way of speech. That's how to get rid of resentment for that person. How should you get rid of resentment for a person whose behavior by way of speech is impure, but whose behavior by way of body is pure? Suppose there was a lotus pond covered with moss and aquatic plants. Then along comes a person struggling in the oppressive heat, weary, thirsty, and parched. They'd plunge into the lotus pond, sweep apart the moss and aquatic plants, drink from their cupped hands, and be on their way. In the same way, at that time, you should ignore that person's impure behavior by way of speech and focus on their pure behavior by way of body. That's how to get rid of resentment for that person.
Thank you, Ayavimala, so much. And we have Catherine.
How should you get rid of resentment for a person whose behavior by way of body and speech is impure, but who gets an openness and clarity of heart from time to time? Suppose there was a little water in a cow's hoof print. Then along comes a person struggling in the oppressive heat, weary, thirsty, and parched. This little bit of water is in a cow's hoof print. If I drink it with my cupped hands or a bowl, I'll stir it and disturb it, making it undrinkable. Why don't I get down on all fours and drink it up like a cow, then be on my way? So that's what they do. In the same way, at that time, you should ignore that person's impure behavior by way of speech and body and focus on the fact that they get an openness and clarity of heart from time to time. That's how to get rid of resentment for that person. How, sh- how should you get rid of resentment for a person whose behavior by way of body and speech is impure, but who gets an openness and clarity of heart from time to time? Suppose a man was traveling along a road and they were sick, suffering gravely ill. And it was a long way to a village, whether ahead or behind. And they didn't have any suitable food or medicine, or a competent carer, or someone to bring them to the neighborhood of a village. Then another person traveling along the road sees them and thinks of them with nothing but compassion, kindness, and sympathy. Oh, may this person get suitable food or medicine, or a competent carer, or someone to bring them to the neighborhood of a village, so that they don't come to ruin right here. In the same way, at that time, you should ignore that person's impure behavior by way of speech and body, and the fact that they don't get an openness and clarity of heart from time to time, and think of them with nothing but compassion, kindness, and sympathy.
Thank you so much. Hui Lin.
Oh, may this person give up bad conduct by way of body, speech, and mind, and develop good conduct by way of body, speech, and mind. Why is that? So that when their body breaks up after death, they are not reborn in a place of loss, a bad place, the underworld, hell. That's how to get rid of resentment for that person. How should you get rid of resentment for a person whose behavior by way of body and speech is pure and who gets an openness and clarity of heart from time to time? Suppose there was a lotus pond with clear, sweet, cool water, clean, with smooth banks, delightful, and shaded with many trees. Then along comes a person struggling in the oppressive heat, weary, thirsty, and parched. They plunge into the lotus pond to bathe and drink. And after emerging, they sit or lie down right there in the shade of the trees. In the same way, at that time, you should focus on that person's pure behavior by way of body and speech, and on the fact that they get an openness and clarity of heart from time to time. That's how to get rid of resentment for that person, relying on a person who is impressive all around. The mind becomes confident. A mendicant should use these 5 methods to completely get rid of resentment when it has arisen towards anyone.
Thank you so much, Whelan. Thank you, everyone who read tonight. Um, so yeah, take a dip into a lotus pond. How about that? And what is this? Focusing on when a person has an openness and clarity of heart from time to time. Stephen, what are your thoughts on this? And what are these various ways of drinking and getting rid of the oppressive heat? How do they speak to us in terms of resentment?
Well, it is kind of weird, I think, for me at least, to read these similes. They don't, it's not the kind of maybe mode of thinking I normally have because I don't live in India 2,600 years ago. Um, but I just love the language. If you can scroll down, I think a little bit for the third person, but but behavior by way of body is pure, or has an openness of and clarity of heart from time to time. I mean, I think that's just a beautiful statement where I guess in modern language, we would say we focus on the positive attributes of that person. And we understand that although they might be incredibly annoying right now, they're fundamentally, or at least in part, a good person. And so it takes a degree of sort of mental clarity to know that, right? If one falls into a rage, well, then there's very little reasoning left, and we can't really start to think, yeah, well, but Regina has some nice qualities too sometimes. And we forget about that. And so I would say all of these techniques require a fair amount of mindfulness and clear understanding, right? Because if our mindfulness completely goes away, it's very hard to recover. What did you think, Regina?
Yeah, I definitely, I love this because, and then we'll go, I see that we have some hands raised. I love this because no one's all, well, with very, very few exceptions, no one's all bad, right? And um, I think also uh, there's, there is seeing the good in others. And by doing that, we can also have a sense of, for me, this also speaks a bit of forgiveness. And so I am, for me, I am seeing that as well.
Yeah,
Right?
I agree. Catherine?
Okay, yeah. My takeaway is I look at method number 1. If someone who's impure in action, indeed, but then pure in speech. So I think instead of harping on the person's negative side, it's better to attend or focus on the person's good qualities, wholesome qualities, if he has.
Yeah.
So just consider the person's wholesome conduct. This may help.
Yeah, I think maybe that corresponds to that simile of the dirty rag, where we sort of tear off the piece that we can use or the piece that's not so dirty. So we sort of look at the actuate, what's that? There's a song, right? Actuate, accent the positive, something like that.
Accentuate.
Accentuate the positive. Focus on the positive qualities and sort of not focus on the negative qualities, which of course are the ones that are so irritating. Yeah.
Well, I've found that, I have found that when focusing on one's negative qualities or aspects, it's completely unhelpful. Uh, I no longer see that person realistically. I've negated entire aspects of that individual, and it's generating negative emotions towards them, negative emotions within myself, and it's also generating negative karma. And I just love this idea of plunging into the cool waters of the lotus pond. It's so purifying, right? And being able to drink the water because it's good for you and it's healthy. I just love that, me and my water metaphors. I like that a lot. When was the last time you ever approached a pond and been able to drink from it, by the way?
I think that would definitely never happen around here.
Yeah, no, definitely not. But that's a whole other topic. But I see Sophia has her hand raised.
Thank you. I was thinking about my last bad emotion of angriness and hatred, but always it's not common, thanks God. But when happening, I noticed that it's because my ego or my I, myself, I don't know how to name it. Maybe you can help me. Is in the first place, and I feel hurt, and I have to see how I feel, and I feel hatred for the person that I love the most. But only I can see the good thing about that person if I come down and stop putting myself in the center of the universe like the person that was hurt. But not only looking at the other person, I have to see myself first in order to have the possibility to see the good things in the other person. And then I feel that the humble sensation, and I can see good things, and I calm down. But not only because of the other person. First of all, I have to see myself and calm down myself. I find this on me, not in the other person.
Yeah, I
Thank
think that's a good point. I
you.
think if we can look at ourselves and say, well, I actually have done the same thing. I've had this problem when I drive and I notice things that people do which I find annoying at the least. And then I try to say to myself, well, I've actually done that myself. And I'm not proud of it. Maybe I was having a bad day. And so maybe they're having a bad day. And why should I be so mad at them for essentially doing the same thing I've done too? So I think it's a good point that we can sort of see this behavior as often universal, that we all have these same kinds of problems. We're all trying to navigate this difficult world.
Right. And I think that was brought forth very clearly. There's this mendicant suffering with heat that automatically sets you up for compassion, right? And I think it's the compassion that we should have for others who we feel have transgressed. And I do like that, Sophia and Stephen, that idea of looking at myself. When my roommate annoys me, and my endless train of roomies, I remind myself, I am sure there's things that I do that are annoying to my roommate. Talking to myself, listening to the news, talking to the cat. To me, it's normal. Come on, of course I'm going to do that. But maybe to her, she's like sitting in her room thinking, oh my God, I can't believe she's still talking to that cat. So, we all can be annoying. But just quickly to go, I just want to touch on these metaphors that I love the mendicant. And Stephen, you talked about the rag and tearing off the part that we don't really need and just keeping the good part. you know, and then this pond and getting rid of the muck on top. And then, as I said, diving into where it's really beautiful and the water's pure and lovely. And I just love that. And then not stirring up the muck and the cow's hoof print. I don't know about you guys, but sometimes, well, I haven't been in the office for a while thanks to COVID, but have you ever met that person in the office who's like stirs up the muck, you know, and then it's like there's problems that happen. But if you just are calm and don't do a lot of stirring, then the muck won't rise to the surface. So these
And
are.
it seemed, I just wanted to say that that one seems interesting because it really shows that we should try to make an effort to meet that person even more than halfway, right? That it's not, we're not taking the attitude of, well, the world is here to please me, or these people are here to make my life nice. That it's actually advocating that we get down on all fours sometimes and try to make an effort to meet them part way or in some way, to find something that's not so annoying.
Mm.
And so it shows a very active role that we, as the irritated ones, need to often play.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, definitely. Thank you. James?
Yeah, I think the metaphor of the cow's hoof print is kind of what Stephen's talking about, like going way out of your way. If you've ever been in the country and there's a shallow, muddy pond or something where you do need to sip from it, you sort of put your lips to the river or that little sort of flat area. It's like taking great pains to take what little good you can. I kind of had a question for you two, because I noticed the top three remedies of metta and compassion and equanimity, they reminded me of the Brahma Vihara. Is there a further correlation that you see in the Brahma Viharas, the development of that compassion, etc., in this little poem?
You mean in the first sutta we did, the sort of prequel one?
Yes, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, well, certainly those three qualities are three of the four so-called immeasurables, illimitables, divine abodes, sort of like really the best mental states we can ever have. And so we try to radiate out these extremely wholesome and beautiful qualities. And hopefully when we do that, we, by having these highly wholesome mental states, are much more resistant to being angry, to being annoyed, which are, of course, unwholesome mental states. And so maybe another way to think about it is by actively generating the wholesome, we sort of gird or protect ourselves or our minds from the unwholesome. Because those things can't really coexist. We can't really be both with a mind of loving kindness and angry. It seems like it would be either or. So if we are truly with a mind of compassion, say, we can't be resentful. And so as we just said, and Regina said too, we have to sort of go, make an effort, actively do these things.
Thank you.
Thank you for pointing that out. Leonardo.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Oh, that's great. Yes, no, just I'd like to continue a little bit on the issue of compassion. So I'll try to be brief for the sake of time. But as we were reading this together, an idea just came to my mind, which I didn't have while I was reading this on my own prior to this meeting. And an aspect of this text that I hadn't seen before, and it's perhaps just of course, it's my reading of this moment, which I think is very interesting, because what happens is, and just bear with me, I perhaps, as many times do, I just pushing the envelope a little bit. Uh, but at least just I'm just in the second. I may be making some mistakes here, but I think second and third case, and even yes, in the first, second, and third case in this text, there is a need from the person that is, for example, this one is very thirsty and needs to have water, or just somehow get this rug. Um, uh, and then in the fourth scenario is different because the the person is sick and it's the other person who is needing our compassion and is needing help. Um, and of course, always knowing that we can be in that situation too, and we are many times in both situations at the same time, different aspects and dimensions of our lives. And then in the last one is yes, we are needing of this person um, who somehow is have some virtue, and we may just rest on knowing about having this friend of knowing this person. So I think it's one of the perspectives to see this is the issue of um, interdependence, and also the fact that we sometimes are so absorbed in ourselves and the self and the I that we just forget about the need, the fact of that the interdependence and 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 just enriching with the contact with others is a nature that we have. And also it reminded me about a beautiful book, The Heart is Noble, Changing the World from the Inside Out, by the Karmapa Dorje, in which the premise of the book is the nature of the heart is noble. Of course, it may be obscured, but because of the mind and all of our fetters, but we have to believe and have faith on this that the other person, the other person's heart in nature is noble, and then uh, that's a bridge for compassion and to ourselves too. So those were all the uh, ideas that were just arising as
Thank
we
Thank
were
you.
reading this.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was beautifully shared. Linda?
I wanted to kind of go back to what Sophia, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. What Sophia was bringing up and about having to look at ourselves first. Because it made me think about that last line in the poem that you were reading before. Yet still I could not see myself. And how powerful that is. I think so much resentment and anger comes from projection. And particularly, I think the resentment and all of the sutta is really talking so much about accepting imperfection, both in ourselves and in others. So I just think of that mirroring between being able to see the imperfection in ourselves as well as in others and hold the loving kindness, the compassion in the highest regard. So yeah, just that.
Thank you. It's a
Thank
beautiful
yes.
point.
Mm-hmm. It is. That is very beautiful. And I thank you so much, everyone who shared, and Leonardo and Linda. When we can forgive others their imperfection, we can give ourselves ours. And in that way, we can be so much happier. We can be so much happier because we're not constantly criticizing, finding fault in others and ourselves. So, yeah, thank you so much.
Or as Garrison Keillor sometimes says, the world is not here to please us. And if we can actually come to terms with that, it can go a long way.
Definitely. Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It was wonderful to see you all. We will continue in our discussion on this very important and unfortunately ever timely topic. We wish you all a beautiful rest of the week, and we look forward to seeing you all Sunday or Monday. So have a beautiful next few days.
Thank you
Thank you.
all.
Thank you, everybody.